It is not until a single fleeting moment that everything is turned upside down that you completely comprehend how delicate your life is. Something that was supposed to be a straightforward vacation for the family, a tranquil getaway to the mountains for some reconnection, turned out to be something that Thomas insisted on. At all times, he was concerned with outward appearances, and he desired to portray us as a flawless and cohesive family. Not only did it not matter that our marriage had become more of a business-like arrangement than a personal relationship, but it also did not matter that Ethan, his son from his first marriage, had always been distant and had never completely accepted me as his stepmother. The trip was something I consented to more out of habit than for any other reason. I was the one who did it. Comply, agree, and maintain the status quo. Nevertheless, I did not discover tranquility throughout that weekend. It is imperative that you subscribe to my channel in order for me to continue providing you with further amazing genuine stories such as this one. Additionally, make sure that you watch this video all the way through to the finish and give it a thumbs up because the narrative that is being told is going to be amazing. In order to demonstrate your support, kindly click the like button. Initially, there was a straightforward error. A discrepancy with the reservations for the lodge. The dates that Thomas had scheduled for our rooms were incorrect, which resulted in us being short one. When I asked him about it, he nonchalantly downplayed it and suggested that Ethan and I share a room. He had said at the time, "It's just for one night," and then waved it off. During that particular night, when I lay down next to Ethan in the dim light of our shared room, I came to the realization that the family dynamic that we had actually constructed was quite unstable. In retrospect, I find myself wondering whether it was predetermined, whether everything was destined to disintegrate at some point in the future, or whether it was that one night spent at the lodge that set everything off. Whatever the case may have been, the repercussions flowed much deeper than I could have possibly expected. These are the events that led to the disintegration of everything. There was a lengthy and quiet journey to the lodge, the kind of silence that only occurs when individuals don't have anything more to say for themselves. While I was sitting next to Thomas and staring out the window, he was driving and paying attention to the road in front of him. His eyes were locked on his phone as he sat in the back of the room with his headphones on. It was not a new experience. Our family vacations had always been like this. 3 people heading in different directions and never really connecting with one another. Hiking boots, did you bring those with you? In an effort to break the silence, Thomas asked. My response was unequivocal, yes. His concentration was already back on the road when he gave a slight nod. While we were driving, Ethan hardly spoke at all. Rarely did he do so, particularly in my presence. At the age of 28, he possessed a manner that was so focused and subdued that it gave the impression that he was always concealing something. The dark hair and sharp features that he inherited from his mother served as continuous reminders of the lady that Thomas had loved before I was born. I didn't feel any resentment toward Ethan because of that. Although he was only a youngster at the time, his mother had passed away, leaving a void that no one, not even Thomas, could ever fill. Nevertheless, there was a gap between us, and neither one of us had made a significant attempt to close that gap. It was just as the sun was about to set that we arrived at the lodge, bathing the mountains in a golden light. The lodge was modest, rustic, and wonderful, and it brought back memories of some of our previous family trips. During the time that Ethan and I were unloading the car, Thomas checked us in. While Ethan was walking on the gravel with a suitcase, he made the remark that this location is quite pleasant. In response, I said that I was shocked that he was talking to me. Before returning his attention to the vehicle, he gave me a fleeting glance. The lodge's interior was nice and appealing, with wooden panels and furniture that was comfortable to sit on. Nevertheless, Thomas's look conveyed to me that something was wrong when he returned from working at the front desk. As he rubbed his hair in exasperation, he stated that there had been a misunderstanding. There are only 2 rooms available for use tonight, and the third one won't be ready until tomorrow. While I was looking at him, I became aware of what this signified. So what should we do now? He said it in a brisk manner. We'll figure it out. You and Ethan are free to share the other room, and I will take one of the rooms. My stomach began to tighten, but I did not dispute with the situation. By this point, Thomas had already moved on from the problem, considering it nothing more than an annoyance. A queen-size bed and a warm lamp that shed a lovely glow over the duvet were the fixtures in the room that Ethan and I shared, which was a modest but cozy space. Through the open window, the aroma of pine was able to make its way inside. The tone of Ethan's voice was unremarkable as he laid his suitcase down and stated, "This is cozy." I mustered up a smile. One night is all that is required. Almost immediately, the awkwardness set in. While Ethan fiddled with his phone, I attempted to divert my attention by unpacking and putting my belongings away in the bathroom, which was limited in size. As the night wore on, the tension in the room became increasingly intense. While Ethan was standing at the window, he added, "You could take the bed. I'm able to sleep on the pavement." I responded by shaking my head and saying, "Don't be so ridiculous. Both of us are able to fit comfortably in the bed." A moment of hesitation preceded his nod. The ceiling was the focus of my attention while I reclined on one side of the bed. While he was lying next to me, Ethan breathed softly. In spite of my best efforts, I was unable to persuade myself that everything would be all right and that nothing would take place. That evening, things began to feel different for the first time. Outside, the sound of crickets reverberated, and the atmosphere in the room changed to one of peace and quiet. In order to create an environment that was reminiscent of a dream, the lamp's gentle light threw shadows on the walls. While I pretended to read a book, Ethan was on one side of the bed, browsing through his phone. I was not paying attention to him. On the other hand, my mind was not in it. Dinner, like the most of our meals together, had been a peaceful affair. When Thomas was talking about his work, he would tell stories, and Ethan and I would nod along with him. Not one of us was actually present at the time. It was impossible for me to pinpoint the exact moment when the tension began, but it was possible that it had always been present, a subtle stream that I had overlooked for many years. From this point on, it was impossible to ignore. "There's no way you're actually reading it, is there?" All of a sudden, Ethan broke the silence with his question. "How come you are able to say that?" In an effort to appear unassuming, I inquired. His phone was put down as he smiled and smirked. "Over the course of the past 20 minutes, you have been on the same page." With a trembling voice, I laughed quietly. "You have me in your grasp." Suddenly, Ethan shifted, and I saw that his body language was more relaxed than I had been accustomed to seeing. "What are you thinking about right now?" It was a question that I had not anticipated. "None of it." When I said it too hastily. He showed his lack of conviction by raising an eyebrow. "Margaret, I know you better than that. Come on, this is ridiculous." He uttered my name in such a way that caused my heart to skip a beat. It wasn't the typical amount of silence or hostility. It had a novel sensation. While lying back against the headboard, I let out a sigh. It's possible that I'm just reflecting on the way things went in the past. Vacations with the family used to be a lot of fun, right? A smile appeared on Ethan's face as he nodded. To be sure, they were. It was back when my father and I were the only ones in the room, before I recognized how phony everything was. The impact of his comments was immense, but not because he was in error. In a low voice, I stated that I had attempted to make this work, in order to be someone who both you and your father could rely on. I am aware that he stated calmly, "I am grateful for it even though I do not always express my gratitude." Suddenly, it seemed as though the barriers that had been separating us were beginning to crumble away. Over the course of several hours, we discussed our frustrations over Thomas and recalled the vacations that Ethan had taken with his mother. Ethan remarked, with a warm and sentimental tone in his voice, that she was the glue. While Dad was always working, Mom was the one who made things feel completed. While my heart was heavy, I nodded. Being able to live up to someone like that is a challenge. Simply put, he told me that you do not need to. After a while, we settled into a relaxed silence. After turning off the lamp, I let the moonlight to make its way into the room freely. His leg came into contact with mine. "I'm sorry," I mumbled as I hastily retreated from there. His tone was soft and unruffled as he repeated, "It's fine." However, the moment had a different energy. I was reminded of how close we were by the fact that every little movement he made appeared to be exaggerated. "How are you doing?" In a hushed voice, Ethan broke the silence with his question. As my throat became dry, I paused. "Elite, I am doing well." He stated that he did not believe you to be. Now his voice is more subdued. Immediately prior to my ability to respond, he moved closer to me. His body warmth pressing against mine became numb. I hushed Ethan in my ear. "Are there times when you feel as though you are acting?" He inquired abruptly, his tone being abrasive. "You are living a life that is not truly yours, are you? You are carrying out all of your responsibilities, but you never feel like you are." I felt a chord deep within me as he spoke those words. On a daily basis, I admitted. Raw and truthful, the words hovered between us like a cloud. And after that it took place. Nothing dramatic or premeditated happened. From one minute to the next, we were speaking in a low voice. His hand then lightly touched mine, and neither of us moved away from the contact. "Is this all right?" It was a whisper. I ought to have told them no. It was my responsibility to get up and leave the room. On the other hand, I turned toward him, my heart beating as I did so. Yes, I hushed in response. We remained silent as we lay down once it was ended. I was experiencing a tornado of perplexity and remorse in my mind. However, I was unable to muster the courage to speak. "According to Ethan, I am sorry." Because of his voice, the silence was broken. I instantly responded, my voice shaking. "Don't apologize for what they've done. It is all right." It was admitted by him that he had no idea what this meant. Just as I do not. It was a whisper. Deep down, however, I was aware of what it meant. The following morning, I awoke earlier than Ethan, and I slipped out of bed in the most stealthy manner possible. The warm golden glow that was projected throughout the room was caused by the gentle light of dawn that was able to diffuse through the drapes. As I dressed, I hurriedly avoided looking in the mirror. And by the time Ethan roused himself from his sleep, I was already seated by the window, feigning to be completely engrossed in the scenery of the mountains. He murmured, his voice heavy with the effects of sleep. "Morning." "Morning," I responded, maintaining a neutral tone throughout. He seemed to be hesitating for a little while, as if he wanted to explain more. On the other hand, he only nodded and then went into the restroom without uttering a single word. When Ethan and I met Thomas in the dining room for breakfast, the tension that had been building up between us was visibly apparent. Thomas sipped his coffee and read the newspaper, occasionally making comments on the weather or our plans for the day. He was blissfully unaware of all that was going on around him. However, I was aware of Ethan's gaze on me, which was heavy and searching, and it required every ounce of my effort to avoid making eye contact with him. I reassured myself that the tension would subside, that the memory of the previous night would start to go away, and that things would go back to how they were before. Nevertheless, as the day progressed, I came to the realization that there are certain things that, once completed, cannot be undone. After leaving the resort, the journey back was peaceful. It was not the quiet silence that I had hoped for. Rather, it was one that was filled with an unsettling weight, as if every unspoken word and idea was pushing in on us. As he maneuvered the winding mountain roads, Thomas continued to be completely unaware of everything that was going on around him. He was humming and tapping his fingers on the steering wheel. At the same time that I was looking forward with my hands securely folded in my lap, Ethan was sitting in the back seat and looking out the window. I made an effort to concentrate on the landscape that was outside, including the undulating hills, the forests, and the golden light that was coming through the trees. My mind, however, kept going back to the previous evening on a regular basis. My memory was etched with every single detail, even Ethan's breathing and the way his hand had lightly touched mine. However, the implications of everything were obvious and apparent in a way that could not be avoided. Felt unreal, like a dream. In the rearview mirror, I took a chance and gave Ethan a quick glance. I observed the stiffness in his jaw and how his fingers clutched the armrest a bit too tightly. He appeared calm and even disinterested, but I became aware of the tension in his jaw. Neither one of us was looking at the other, and I couldn't tell if it was a relief or a punishment. We were both covering our eyes. Upon our arrival at the driveway, Thomas stretched out his muscles and immediately began making preparations for the remainder of the day. In spite of the fact that I have a meeting scheduled for a couple of hours, he suggested that we go out and do something tonight, perhaps have dinner at that new Italian restaurant. Certainly, I responded without hesitation, despite the fact that the idea of having supper with my family made my stomach turn. There was no sound coming from Ethan. He went into the home without uttering a single word, grabbing his suitcase from the trunk and walking inside. Chores took up the remainder of the afternoon, which was spent there. In addition to folding laundry and cleaning the kitchen, I also reorganized the bookcase that was located in the living room. Anything that will keep me occupied and diverted from my work. But despite my best efforts, my thoughts kept going back to Ethan. I couldn't do anything to stop them. I relived our chat from the previous evening, namely the way in which he had discussed the experience of being disoriented and the act of pretending to be someone he was not. I recalled the sense of calm comprehension that was present in his gaze, the kind that I hadn't had from anybody in years, and most certainly not from Thomas. During my train of thinking, I was distracted by the sound of footsteps on the stairs. When I looked up, I saw Ethan standing in the doorway with his hands stuffed into the pockets of his jeans. "Hey," he said in a clumsy manner. My response was, "Hey," and my voice came out sounding more strained than I had intended it to. Neither one of us spoke for a brief few seconds. He then cleared his throat and cast a glance in the direction of the kitchen. It was only that I was going to go get something to eat. I responded, "Of course," as I moved to the side to allow him to pass. He pushed past me, and despite the fact that our engagement was brief, it left me feeling as though I had lost my air. In an effort to distract myself from the fact that my heart was beating extremely fast whenever he moved, I kept myself busy by cleaning the counter while he searched through the refrigerator. It was last night when he started, his voice trembling. I became completely still, my fingers clenching the dish towel more tightly. Immediately, I stated that there was no need for us to discuss anything. Although he was closing the door to the refrigerator and turning to face me, he demanded that we do. There is no way that we can just act as if it never took place. I inquired in a tone that was more abrasive than I had intended. That is precisely what we need to do. We need to act as if it never happened and move on with our lives. He looked at me for a considerable amount of time, his expression being indecipherable. "Is that how you truly want things to be?" I responded with a shaky voice, making it clear that what I want is irrelevant. "In whatever form this may take, it is not going to happen again." He demanded to know why not. "'Cause it is not correct. Simply because it is inconvenient. Alternately because you are afraid." I spoke out in a resolute manner, turning my back on him. The tone of his speech became more subdued as he moved closer. "Margaret, you don't have to continue your act of pretending." Upon searching the kitchen counter, I discovered the note, which was written in his sloppy handwriting. "Please give me some time to collect my thoughts. Please don't be concerned about me. I'll be all right. It is necessary for me to work things out on my own instead." As if I had been punched in the gut, the words struck me. As the feeling of panic began to rise in my chest, I clenched the note tightly in my fists. "Oh, what is that?" As Thomas entered the kitchen while holding his phone, he inquired about the situation. I repeated it with a trembling voice. "Ethan has left." As he took the memo from me, Thomas grimaced and took it. "What in the name of all that is holy mean? What happened to him?" I confessed, with tears welling up in my eyes, that I had no idea. Before he let out a sigh, Thomas ran his fingers over his hair. "That young man never gives things a second thought. It's likely that he's pouting from somewhere. When he is hungry, he will return right away." Because of his dismissive tone, my blood began to boil. "Thomas, this is not a case of sulking. Naturally, he is agitated. So, what exactly do you anticipate I will do in response to this?" He responded with a shot. "As an adult, he is. He is responsible for his own behavior if he wants to behave like a youngster. I was dumbfounded by his lack of interest, and I gazed at him. Do you truly not care about this at all? His tone did not correspond with the words he was saying, but he did say, "Of course I care. But I'm not going to go after him in any way either. It's time for him to mature and take responsibility for his own issues." Attempting to regain control of my breathing, I turned my back on him. The pressure that everything is exerting on me at the moment. In the days that followed, the pain was excruciating. I spent every hour of my life wondering about Ethan's whereabouts, if he was safe, and whether he would return. My attempt to reach him was unsuccessful because his phone went directly to voicemail. Even the idea of traveling around in search of him crossed my mind. On the other hand, I was at a loss for words. Thomas did not appear to be concerned. He continued to go about his business as if nothing had changed, allowing me to bear the burden of my concern on my own. I was sitting in the living room staring at my phone early one evening when I received a call from my buddy Sophia. The tone of her voice was filled with concern as she said, "I haven't heard from you in quite some time. Is everything in order?" I paused for a little period, unsure of how to react to the situation. In conclusion, I stated that it is complicated. "Are you confused? How is it?" She exerted pressure. With a sigh, I ran my hand through my hair and then let it out. Ethan departed. In addition, he did not specify where he was going or when he would return. The question was asked with a harsh tone. Did something happen? As the burden of the truth continued to push down on me, I hesitated once again. In order to avoid telling the whole truth, I said that it has merely been stressful recently. "Aha!" Sophia exclaimed, demonstrating that she was not convinced. "You know where to find me if you are in need of someone to chat to, so just let me know." "Thank you," I whispered to myself. On the other hand, I wasn't really certain that I meant it. After the call was over, I simply sat there for a considerable amount of time, staring at the vacant spot where Ethan had been. The absence of him made the house feel even more empty. Additionally, I noticed that I was rehashing our most recent chat over and over again. I reflected on the way he had looked at me, the unfiltered vulnerability that was visible in his eyes. I reflected about his inquiry, which was the one to which I had not been able to provide an honest response. "For you, was it just a simple oversight?" I was unaware of it. It could have been, but it could also have been something else entirely, something that I wasn't prepared to admit. I was only aware of the fact that I was missing him, and the thought of missing him was the thing that worried me the most. The void that Ethan had neglected to leave behind was intolerable. As the days went into weeks, the silence that prevailed in the house became increasingly profound with each passing instant. Thomas kept on as if nothing was amiss, immersing himself in his job and dismissing any mention of Ethan with a wave of dismissal on his face. More than once, Thomas reassured himself that he would be all right. And he is always. To be honest, I wasn't feeling well, and I wasn't sure whether Ethan was either. During certain afternoons, I found myself driving around aimlessly, hoping and praying that I could catch a glimpse of him while he was walking down a street or sat in a neighborhood cafe. I was really obsessed with checking his social media accounts, but I couldn't find any trace of him anywhere. It appeared as though he had just vanished without a trace. I couldn't help but give the impression that I was to blame for his departure. Despite the fact that the message he left was brief and somewhat casual in nature, the timing did not appear to be a coincidence. What was it that I'd done to him? Regardless of how much I tried to divert my attention away from it, that question continued to torment me and bear down on me. At the time that I discovered it, it was Thursday evening. I found myself roaming aimlessly from room to room in the house after Thomas had left for a dinner meeting. I was the only person in the house. In the end, I found myself in Ethan's room without even realizing it. The aroma of his cologne, which was quite familiar to him, lingered barely in the air. At the same time as I was trying to figure out where he might be, I perched on the edge of his bed and absent-mindedly traced the seams of the quilt with my fingertips. The first thing that caught my attention was his desk. The papers were stacked in a haphazard manner on one of the corners of the room. It was not my intention to pry. This is what I told myself, but my curiosity got the better of me, and I took up the stack and began to look through it without paying attention to what I was doing. During that time I discovered the letter. Despite the fact that it was not addressed to me, I was immediately aware that it was about me. To my dear Margaret, I truly do not know how to express myself verbally. Therefore I am writing it down instead. I sincerely hope that you never even read this, but if you do, I hope that it clarifies things for you. The thoughts that keep running through my head are of you, of us, and of that evening. I am aware that it was incorrect, and I am also aware that it most likely not meant anything to you, but for me it meant everything. You give me the impression that I am an individual who is not merely a failure or a letdown. You give me the impression that I am important, and I am at a loss for what to do with that emotion. I have attempted to let it go, but I am unable to do so, and I believe that this is the reason why I have to leave. I apologize if I have put you in a more difficult position. I had no intention of staying here, but I just cannot continue to do so in this manner. Margaret, make sure you take care of yourself. At all times, Ethan. When I read the letter 3 times, the significance of what it said became more apparent to me each time. When I finally put it down, my hands were shaking, and my mind was racing with a variety of feelings that I was unable to bring together. Because of me, because of what had occurred, because of how I had handled it, or more accurately, because of how I had not handled it, he had left. I ought to have experienced a sense of relief. He was gone, and with him came the risk and temptation. Nevertheless, as a result of his absence, all I felt was a profound and excruciating void, one that threatened to consume me in its entirety. Thomas arrived at his house late that evening. It was evident that the scent of whiskey was sticking to his clothing as his tie went loose. His briefcase was left by the entrance, and he went straight to the kitchen, where he poured himself another drink without uttering a single word. I tagged up with him, holding the letter tightly in my palm. I began to tremble my voice, asking you, Thomas. His eyes were sleepy when he turned around and looked at me. Margaret, what exactly is it? My grip on the letter became more firm as I voiced my urge to have a conversation with you. He let out a sigh and then set his glass down. Is it possible to wait? A long day has passed for me. I was taken aback when I responded with a resolute, no, it could not wait. With a grimace on his face, he crossed his arms over his bosom. What really is the most significant? When I tried to speak, the word became stuck in my throat. To this point, I was unable to have the courage to reveal everything to him. Rather than that, I presented the letter to him. How come this is? As he took it away from me, he asked. Simply read it, I hushed to myself. The envelope was unfurled, and his eyes scanned the contents of the letter. The expression on his face went from one of uncertainty to one of rage, and finally to something more sinister. I don't even know what this is. He made the demand in a low and menacing tone of voice. Ethan is the one who sent it, I murmured. While he was holding up the letter, he snapped. I'm not kidding. I don't get what he is trying to say here. Margaret, what exactly took place? I could feel the pressure of his rage and his incredulity coming closer and closer to me. What exactly did you do, TSK? When he yelled, his voice reverberated around the kitchen. I didn't intend for it to take place, I murmured, my tears streaming down my face. It was a blunder indeed. He reiterated with malice in his voice that it was a mistake. You consider it to be an error. I was unable to provide a response. It was impossible for him to support the burden of his fury. When Thomas departed that evening, he slammed the door so firmly that it reverberated throughout the entire home. Hours passed while I sat on the floor of the kitchen, staring at the letter that was crumpled up in my hands. Not only did I want to shout and cry, but I also wanted to flee and never look back, but I was unable to move. I compelled myself to get out of bed the following morning. The absence of both Thomas and Ethan filled the house with a gravity that I was unable to escape when I was there. The place felt like it was impossible to be quiet.